We're here back today with Lancer. We'll be doing section 5, which is kind of advice and just stuff in general for running the game. The Game Master's Guide. Every game of Lancer needs a GM. If you're here reading this section, that's probably you. The GM is responsible for the most important parts of the game, creating a story and a world for that story to take place in, portraying the NPCs and acting as a facilitator, judge, and arbiter of the rules. This may sound daunting, but that's why this section of the book exists. To give you tools and help you with the heavy lifting. This can be an incredibly rewarding experience, and we believe everyone should try it at some point. Anyone can be great at this with little practice, and this section will equip you with the tools you need to tell an amazing story. In this section, you will find advice for setting up a game session or campaign and creating hooks to draw your players into the world you're creating, ideas for rewarding players, a toolkit for changing the game using certain rules and adding extra flavor, a guide for creating non-player characters for mech combat. Before we move forward, there's a reason this section is called a guide. It's a jumping off point rather than a set of rules. At the end of the day, we hope it will inspire you to create your own content, worlds, and NPCs for Lancer. Principles. There are many different opinions about what makes a good GM, as there are players and GMs. Our rule of thumb is this is the best way to GM is whichever one works for you and the people in your game. But it can be tricky to figure out how to create a great play environment on your own. For that reason, there are some principles for GMs that can be applied to almost all situations. If you keep these principles in mind, wear the strong belief it will enhance your game and the storytelling in it. As the GM, your job is to facilitate, arbitrate, and make rulings, and to adapt your notes, world, and narrative in response to your players' choices. Your job isn't to defeat your players, although your role includes setting the tone and facilitating play. Your mission isn't to ensure your players' characters wind up dead and defeated. You're there to make sure everyone is having a good time and engaged in the collaborative story. That said, you should still challenge your players. Failure is rich in narrative and role-playing territory. 2. Renounce control. As a GM, accept the story you tell may not be the one you outlined. Your players will kill important NPCs before they become important. Your players will not go to that colony where they could find an important data log. Your players may not bite the hook you want them to. The player characters with their backstories are perfectly integrated into your campaign might die, forcing you to revise your notes. Ultimately, it's important to go with the story that you're telling with your players at the table rather than to stick to the one you originally envisioned. 3. Consider your players. As a GM, try to set expectations and ensure that everyone at the table feels comfortable and get a chance to contribute. Make sure that your players are comfortable with the tone and expectations of your game, both in terms of content and the type of game you're running. If you're planning to grapple with a sensitive subject, ask yourself, is it really important to include it in your game, and clearly talk through your intentions with your players. If they don't feel safe and included at the table, that's on you. It's your job as a facilitator of the game to reach out to them. Additionally, remember that different players might enjoy different kinds of stories. Some players love combat-heavy games, others prefer political sessions full of role-playing in which nobody fires a shot. Shouldn't try to satisfy everybody, but be clear about what kind of game you're running so that players can set up their expectations. 4. Say yes. Try to say no as little as possible. While some things will be either impossible, whether due to the rules, your judgment, or common sense, it's always better to say yes with caveats than it is to say no. Instead of outright denial, give player new options or more ways of accomplishing their goals. Offer them lesser outcomes or just let them attempt it anyway. The outcome will usually be the same, but handing the choice over to the players empowers and rewards them, as well as keeping the story moving. Remember, players can carry some of the storytelling weight. If they ask whether they can do something, one of the best responses is to turn the question back at them, asking how they do it. At the heart, Lancer is a collaborative storytelling game. You should want your players laughing, crying, serious, and silly. You should want them doodling their characters on other players' terms, or ordering takeout over to eat over their character sheet. The GM isn't the reason the players show up. They show up for your characters and your world. Without protagonists in your drama, you have no game and no story. Listening responses from players is an easy way to engage with players as a GM. Eliciting simply means asking for information responses directly from the players. This might sound tricky, but in truth, it's a simple tool that can be very helpful. Here's a couple ways you can elicit action from players. Ask questions, especially a simple one. Address characters, not players. Talk to the pilot instead of the player. Be descriptive and don't jump straight to talking about game rules. Ask your players if they want to try climbing that cliff instead of telling them to make a skill check. Keep things in character. When players talk to NPCs or ask them questions, try to respond as that NPC, not as yourself. When they talk to each other, ask them to... I do like the first half. The second half, I think that's really up to them. I think that's really not necessarily just in general blanket advice. I think that's really up to the group. Setting up a game. Lancer is designed for a group of 3 to 5 players, excluding the GM. You can play with more players or fewer. Additionally, combat can take a long time with a lot of players. So keep in mind, the more players you have, the slower the narrative will be. Each player needs a character sheet, a pencil, a d20, and a handful of d6s. Accuracy and difficulty rarely go higher than 4, so it's unlikely a player will need more than 5 or 6 d6s. Typical session of Lancer can take anywhere between 2 and 4 hours, with sessions featuring combat taking longer than those without. A classic piece of GM advice is that it's useful for everyone to agree. Well, yeah. Also, you can take, strongly recommend using a hex or grid map to keep track of characters during combat if you're playing online with, the first session, set expectations for the game, making sure everyone gets an equal opportunity to introduce their characters, building a narrative. By narrative we don't, as a GM you're going to have to do some work to set up the worlds. Here are some ideas how to begin building the narrative of your campaign, but they are only suggestions, not prescriptions. You might ask yourself some of the following questions. Why should my players embark on this narrative? Why should my players deal with that character instead of ignoring them? Why should my players care about the stakes I set up? When might your players want to embark on this narrative in particular? I don't know. It's just sample answers. Keep in mind, players don't necessarily share the same interests as their characters, although they will usually choose to play characters that align with those interests. Try to strike a balance between responding to character desires and player needs. Don't be afraid of editing on the go. If half your players start losing interest during story-heavy sessions, adjust accordingly and vice versa. Yeah, okay. And they're just telling you to feel free to improvise, and then gives you a table of sample hooks if you feel you need it. We'll read Clarion Call. The great leader has died, and his heirs have begun to scramble for power. The heir who rules your continent has put out a call for all able-bodied citizens to arm themselves and report for muster. You and your friends have only just come of age. Again, this doesn't really mesh with like what you proclaimed about like these characters are supposed to be the best of the best. We'll read the next one. All over the world, the oceans are rising. It is a swell. The tide once every 10,000 years when the oceans rise and swallow all but the largest islands. The administrator steward has prayed to God Union for assistance, but while they wait for an omen, they have turned to mortals like yourselves. They have given you great suits of armor that you may become heralds and travel the world to save those can't save themselves. Emissary. On a lonely world, a colonial survey team recently discovered a stone monolith. It's ancient, predating even old humanity. Upon further inspection, the survey team realized what they first thought were weathering marks were eroded remains of pictographs of written language. They have been dispatched by the Union Science Bureau as part of a field team to investigate. Amid further reports, the entrance to a subterranean complex has also been discovered, with mummified human remains and strange spacesuits strapped inside. As if that wasn't enough, strange transmissions have cropped up on your radio. Something on the world is awake and coming to greet us visitors. And I guess these are fine. Just the ones I've even just read don't really mesh with like the setting, the setup they've given you, but that's fine, I guess. We'll read one last one, Holy War. Your world has always stood vast and proud, alone in a sea of night and stars, where this all changed when a strange silver ship arrived from beyond the pale blue sky, streaming lines of vapor line. A dark figure dressed in a gray suit, flanked by thin metal golems, emerged from the skyship's belly and was whisked away to the Godhead. A jealous fire has burned in your bellies like coal ever since. How could the Godhead have chosen this sky creature, this great alien, and not you, your kin? After a time of change during which the Godhead bowed before the stranger and a new idol, Union, was raised in its place, it is time to strike back at you all volunteered to join the stranger's armies, trained with their weapons and their armor, now invited to a grand parade at the temple of the false Godhead. It is time to face your people and return your world back to its true place in the stars. That one seems interesting. So running the game. Advice and clarification. Alright, so golden rules. Specific rules override general rules. Always round up. Yeah, I think we've actually all read this all before. Um, yeah, I think those all popped up before. Session pacing. Yeah, these are all it's just a condensed version of stuff we've read before. So core assumptions. Lancer makes some big assumptions about the fictional world in which your game takes place. Depending on the story you're telling, those things might not be relevant to your campaign. If you want to tweak these assumptions, it's up to you. In a typical Lancer campaign, pilots always have access to printers they can use to build new mechs, but this might not be in the case in your campaign. Maybe. Or you've got limited resources, maybe the printer is broken or damaged, or maybe you're on the fringes where any kind of technology is hard to come by, or maybe the setting doesn't have printers and mechs need to be built and maintained the old way. The ability to print a mech allows players to get back in the game, so to speak, when their mechs are destroyed. Yeah. Many battles are simple affairs with two sides facing off each other. Yeah, no, this is all stuff that's come up before. Then gives you a table for some basic setups. A table for different worlds. In different environments that you can use for ideas. And yeah, I think we'll skip the rest of this section. The rest of it are just more or less just oh, okay. I thought these were just different pilot setups, but these are actually mech builds, so that's a bit different. We'll read this one. On the Sierra Madre line, the 8th ring of territory out from the cradle, the Damgen frame is a familiar sight, manufactured by Park Armored Systems and popularized by Dagger Squadron Mercenary Company. The Damgun is popular for its toughness, kinetic tradability, and reliable off-theater performance. The Dangan is a mech to build strike forces around, a Goliath-class frame capable of mounting powerful mag tech with a design that's tough to counter in kinetic combat. With a small number of fleet contracts in its portfolio, Park Armored Systems is a manufacturer worth keeping an eye on. Indeed, Harrison Armory has taken notice, and rumors suggest a possible partnership in the near future. Glass are relatively mobile defenders that can bring enemies to them. With crush targeting, Glass can target enemies who focus attacks on them. Glass target fast or hard to hit characters. The size of Glass provides cover to their allies, and it has all of these builds have three different sets, depending on how, intense you want the encounter. Well, this one looks interesting, so I'll read it too. Ronin frames differ from those favored by berserkers and demolishers in that they are retrofitted or improvised to create tactical applications. They are perfect built to excel in melee combat. Although they are seen as somewhat antique by many commentators, the rise of stasis and mag-based defensive technologies made Ronins more viable in modern combat. Ronin are common both among martial cultures and performance combat forms where their superb melee abilities elevate them above the competition. They see less use in cultures that have a preference for ranged combat, but there is certain prestige accorded to the pilots who adopt ancient weapons and survive to do it again. The mythic Lancer Susanoo elevated the Searchlight to legendary status when she endorsed the Grand Strike One chassis, which she piloted alongside numerous Albatross wings during the Neo-Celestine disappointment. The Ronin are no-nonsense, high-damage melee strikers. Rebound makes it dangerous for enemies to attack Ronin with ranged weapons, but they tend to suffer against armored enemies and are reliant on accuracy. And then we've seen. So special classes, sometimes you will want NPCs that aren't in Nexus following special classes, human, infantry, squad, and monstrosity cover these situations. Monstrosities are especially large or horrifying natural predators. Although they are usually wild, some monstrosities can be domesticated and trained for combat. Such creatures are in high demand along the farthest reaches of the galaxy. And then you can give your NPCs templates, adding the flavor or changing the way they function in combat, in particular the Ultra, Elite, Grunt, and Veteran templates can make tougher or easier enemies. Unless specified otherwise, as in the case of the squad, you can apply any template to an NPC. Some, like the Veteran, can be applied in addition to other templates like Ultra and Elite to make an especially tough enemy. To apply a template, first build a base NPC, then write down or add any benefits such as additional structure that a template gives passively. Then choose one or more optional systems based on the template. Or the exotic one. Even in a galaxy of wonders, exotics are strange and dangerous enemies. Some feature unique technologies not yet available to the wider galaxy, or wield archaic weapons styles updated to the modern day, while others carry equipment or adopt tactics that are totally alien to Union doctrine. Then you get some bonuses. Scan doesn't reveal any information. The exotic gets a +1 bonus on system saves, and tech attack but against them receive a penalty. The exotic chooses up for 2 options from the exotic systems and traits list. Living chassis. The exotic becomes biological. Blink Space Carver. The exotic teleports when they move. Real Space Extrusion. This exotic is actually an extrusion of a higher concept entity from non-physical space and only partially corporeal. The exotic gains resistance to all damage, however they only deal half damage, and other characters can freely pass and end their turns in spaces they occupy. as though they weren't there. Living weaponry, the exotic gains immunity to jam. When the exotic reloads weapons, they also regain HP. Or you can choose one of the exotic's weapons. Damage from that weapon can't be reduced in any way. Or you can choose a regeneration trait. Alright, that's all we'll read from that section. So this is the final section. I really think should have been the first. Work stops at sunset. Darkness falls over the building site. The sky is filled with stars. There is the blueprint, they say. Note, the following section briefly explores the history of Union from its foundation to the present day, from Union's own point of view. It is a setting guide intended to be used by players and GMs. Know that it contains spoilers, information, history, and secrets that PCs aren't necessarily aware of, but that are helpful for players themselves to know. For players, use this section as a text to which draw character inspiration, whether that means working within canon, against canon, or in the margins of what is established by the canon is up to you. For GMs, if like your players, do you wish to work within, against, or beyond canon, this is where to look when you need to know to find out how things work in the Lancer setting. Note that this section discusses some potentially distressing topics. Discusses the reality of life at the margins of Union's influence, where the Third Committee's project of realizing universal human dignity has not yet been won. In this book, there are some difficult or unnatural themes and content discussed. Lancer takes place in a setting recovering from a millennia of cruel rule. Imperial Earth First ideology that had little time, space, or care to acknowledge beings or perspective that ran counter to their tyranny. We want to acknowledge that many of the phenomena and acts touched on in Lancer are real phenomena, are ongoing acts of injustice and cruelty. They are not simply fantasy or interesting devices. Their inclusion in Lancer is by no means a flippant choice intended to be read as endorsement or idle thought. We think it's important to acknowledge that writing Lancer, we wanted to create a setting where humanity is, in the narrative present, at once in a state of utopia and working to bring it about. We imagine that Union isn't burdened by the same cultural definitions that oppress and align so many people. There's a wide spectrum of expression and identity in Union and its constituent worlds. If decided not to codify in the rules how players may express themselves, please do not note that this absence of definition is not meant to be read as exclusion. It is meant to avoid flattening all possible stories into one canon definition of what it means to have a body in Lancer. We encourage you to play your characters how you see them and consider them to be in canon. We hope that you create narratives and characters that stand against terrible abuses and prejudices. Lancer features no easy aliens to pass these transgressions upon, only other human beings. Humanity alone are the architects of terrible cruelties, but we can also be the architects of better, more just futures. Lancer is a game that involves war, combat, and facing the terrors of the galaxy, human-made or otherwise, but this does not mean a GM should force their players to encounter scenarios or content that could be triggering or harmful. If there is a canon assumption that would cause you or your players to feel unsafe or distressed and does not need to be included, we recommend using the X card as a tool to establish boundaries. And there's a link for that. So accepted timeline 6,000 before Union, Apollo the first of 10. A series of massive generation ships departs from and for identified other world. 5,800 Apollo lands and establishes a colony on the planet Caracas. Sequential launches of the next 9 ships begin thereafter. Catastrophic ecological collapse means the end of the Anthropocene epoch via irreversible mass extinction and climate change. Historians typically identify this as the point at which the fall became inevitable for all humanity. 4,900, the last of the 10 Ayat departs for the stars. 4,900 to 150, the Dark Age, the human population of Cradle, formerly Earth, falls from a peak of around 15 billion to less than 500,000 humans. All contact with the 10 ceases. 150, discovery on Cradle of Massive A, the first of several proof-fall vaults against global social rejuvenation. Additional vaults are identified using data preserved inside, and powers race to control them. 53, the Little Wars began. A polarity struggle between Cradle's major powers fueled by the discovery of the vaults. The accumulation of regional conflicts that followed hurled Cradle into a global war. Foundation period 0 to 2000 Union. At 0, the conclusion of the Little Wars leads to the founding of the Union. And the establishment of the First Committee of Union, retroactively named by the Second Committee. 1400, long-range communication systems are activated, enabling the recovery of countless archived Fall Age SOS transmissions. The Union space program is announced shortly thereafter. A USP expedition lands on Cradle's moon, Luna, and reactivates ancient installations, including a shipyard. 1450, the first Nearlight class ships built on plans preserved in the vaults are launched, seeking worlds identified in legacy star charts. 1998. The USP Anthem, a Nearlight vessel associated with the Boundary Garden mission, reports first contact with distress beacons from 2 of the 10, the Rila and the Armstrong, and those descended from the original crews, the Aunuk peoples, organized under Aun-Ekumene on a nearby habitable world. 1700 to 1999. Expansion within Cradle takes place. It feels weird. I think you'd want to have this one before that. Union mounts expeditions across the worlds and moons of the Cradle systems, repopulating old stations, installations, and colonies. 2000. The Oracle Course installation is discovered under the Vastitas Borealis of Mars. The installation is reactivated, and the 5 voices, advanced machine minds capable of predicting the future with near-perfect precision, are identified. This creates the foundations of what would later become the forecast galactic simulation. First expansion period, 2001 through 2997. 2001, several old human colonies are discovered beyond Cradle, some derelict, others inhabited. The Union Administrative Department is created to oversee interstellar expansion efforts and the reintegration of all rediscovered exclaves. 2800. First contact with the new federation, which later became the Karakin Trade Baronies. 2880. Diplomatic friction between the Aunic peoples and Union colonies in Boundary Garden leads to the First Distal War. Hardline anthro-chauvinists there does not seem to be like a galactic map or anything. I think that would have been really helpful to sort of visualize this about like why or how and where these conflicts are arising. Diplomatic friction between the Aunic peoples and Union colonies in Boundary Garden leads to the First Distal War. Hardline anthro-chauvinist elements in Union launch Piston 1, a mass shotgun-style kinetic strike towards Aunic space. The first committee is dissolved, replaced by the second committee. Also during the first expansion period, Metat Aun appears above the Aunic homeworld, beginning the Aunic First Dawn period. This marks the first human contact with what would be called a Monsit entity. Although Metat Aun remains classified as Monist 2 despite manifesting prior to Monist 1. Don't know what that means yet. The Neo-Anthropocene period. 2998 through 3199. During the course of the forecast iteration, the five voices manifest Monist 1, also known as Ra. Monist 1 is retroactively classified as the first NHP. 3000. Monist 1 ascends, bringing about the Deimos event, the complete disappearance of Deimos from known space. The study of paracausal science becomes possible. The disparate ships, shuttles, and force organizations of the USP are reorganized into the Union Navy. 3002. The first contact accords are signed in negotiations with Monist 1 following the siege of Mars. The concept of non-human persons is defined and applied to the anomalous machine minds left behind. The shackling process is developed to constrain NHPs. 3130 to 3200. Blink space is identified and pierced. The technology to create blink fields is developed, and the first blink station is built. The UAD is dissolved and replaced with the UC. Also, the Aun experienced an intense civil religious conflict, the Aunic Schism, leading to the creation of the Aunic Ascendancy. The Aun Ecumene is formally dissolved, and the ecumenical Aun flee to Boundary Garden in Union space. Most take refuge on Cornucopia, now the capital world of the sector. Second expansion period. 3200 through 4599. The second expansion period begins as the second committee begins a massive union-wide colonization expansion effort throughout the Orion arm of the galaxy. The Blink network is grown through rapid construction of gates. Billions of colonists are sent out to tens of thousands of worlds over this time. This period represents the single largest movement of human life in recorded history. 4500 to 4560. The Herculean Crisis. During the course of this conflict, the efficacy of hard seats and mechanized chassis is demonstrated. Union State manufacturer General Masses Systems begins galaxy-wide production of mechanized chassis. 4560 to 4591. Mounting discontent with the great expansion, the growing need to exist, Piston 1, and the acute criminality of the Vicinian crisis boil over to widespread popular revolution across Cradle and some galactic core worlds. Union is gripped by civil war. Also, during the second expansion period, Ra's Shamra is settled and begins its temperate ages. On Caracas, the new federation is dissolved and replaced by the Kilkin trade baronies. Third committee period for 591 to present. The remaining Central Committee members of the Second Committee agree to terms of surrender in 4591. A new stable government is formed in 4600. The Third Committee, the Union Colonial Mission, is immediately dissolved and the Union Administrative Department is reconstituted. Expansion is halted. In 4600, Harrison I and a number of loyalists flee to Ra's Shamra and establishes Harrison Armory. Harrison Armory and the Karakin trade baronies engage in the interest war. The Union acts as a neutral party, ultimately securing peace. Harrison I returns to Cradle and faces justice in exchange for the Armory's continued sovereignty. The baronies agree to become a member state of the Union. The presence of an Alnic in 5000. The presence of an Alnic Crusade fleet in Boundary Garden is confirmed. For the first time, a blink gate is lost to hostile state actions. The Second Distal War begins. Did they talk about the first one? 5016, the year in which Advance Lancer takes place. We'll try and get through this really quick. The shape of the galaxy. Union classifies territory according to a system of concentric ring. Actually, no. I do have a bit of time left, but I think I'll just go ahead and stop here. And hope this is a chunky section, but hopefully we can get through it in maybe 2 more days, and then we will have finished Lancer. I will be back tomorrow, and we'll pick this up.